I remember the night like it was a half-remembered dream. The city wrapped in fog that made the streets feel empty even when cars hummed somewhere far below. From the rooftop of my apartment building, I watched the pale light of street lamps blur into a gray haze, shadows stretching longer than they should. There was a quiet then, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, a calm that almost felt like safety, until it wasn't. I first noticed them in the corner of my vision, vague forms slipping across walls, moving just outside the glow of the light. They didn't make a sound, yet I could feel their presence, a kind of static that prickled the back of my neck. The fog seemed to swallow them, yet they lingered at the edge of the rooftop, just far enough to disappear when I tried to look directly. I stepped closer to the railing, and the hairs on my arms lifted. The city's hum dulled, as if the buildings themselves were holding their breath. Then I saw it, a shadow too tall to be human, with edges that flickered like candlelight in a gust of wind. It froze for a heartbeat, then melted into the mist. I swallowed hard, my pulse loud in my ears, and knew that whatever it was, it had been waiting. I never should have leaned over the edge. The street was empty. Night had settled early, swallowing the last hints of orange from the autumn sky. Leaves rustled in the corners, brushing against cracked pavement, carrying a chill that bit at my fingers. I walked slowly, shoulders tense, the faint hum of distant traffic fading behind me. The alley appeared like a dark wound between buildings, walls slick with rain, reflecting the pale light of a flickering street lamp. I hesitated. Shadows pooled at the base of the brick, curling and stretching as if they had life of their own. Something moved just beyond the edge of my vision. I stopped. A figure, or maybe many, twisted in the corners of the alley, shapes that weren't people I knew, but mimicked the motions of someone real. A soft wind brushed my neck, cold, wet, insistent. I told myself it was just the wind, but it didn't feel like wind. It carried whispers, barely audible, curling into the hollow of my ears. The street lamp flickered again, struggling. Shadows jumped, twitching along the walls, jerking like broken puppets. I stepped forward. Footsteps followed, soft, hesitant, echoing. Off the brick, I quickened my pace. The shadows didn't. They waited. Every turn of the alley felt longer than the last. The silence pressed into me, heavy, thick. I could hear my own breathing, uneven, my heart thudding in my chest, loud enough to make the walls hum. Then, movement. At the far end of the alley, a shadow shifted. It was waiting. I froze. It didn't come closer, didn't move away, just lingered. The cold wind curled around me again, sharper this time. It carried a faint metallic scent, rust or something worse. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, but the alley smelled of wet stone and fear. My hands trembled. The street lamp flickered once more, throwing a pale static light. The walls seemed to breathe, in and out, rising and falling with slow, deliberate motion. Another shadow stretched across the bricks, a shape that shouldn't exist. I could feel its eyes before I could see. Them empty, hungry, watching. Moved faster. The alley narrowed. Footsteps echoed. Not mine, behind me, beside me. I couldn't tell. Every corner seemed to pulse with waiting shapes, crouched low, ready to spring. I forced my legs forward, heart hammering, lungs burning. Then, nothing. The shadows receded, slipping back into cracks and puddles, leaving only the pale glow of the street lamp and the faint drip of water from a leaking gutter. I stopped at the mouth of the alley, tried to convince myself it was over. But at the far end, where darkness pooled, the shadow remained. It didn't move, it didn't breathe, it simply waited. I swallowed hard and kept walking. The wind followed me, cold, quiet, watching, even now. When I think back, I can feel it brushing against my neck, waiting. The wind was sharp up here, cold, carrying the smell of wet concrete and distant smoke. I stepped onto the rooftop just as fog rolled in. thick and gray, curling between the antennas and rusted vents. The city stretched below me. Pale lights flickered. Sirens pulsed far away, muffled, like they were underwater. And then I saw them. At first, just shadows against the mist, elongated shapes moving slowly, impossibly, their heads tilted in angles that shouldn't exist. No faces, no features, yet I could feel them watching. Not me exactly, but through me. A hum floated in the fog, low, persistent. A vibration that tickled my bones. I couldn't tell if it came from the shapes or the rooftop itself. My breath came out in white puffs, freezing on my fingers. The fog thickened. I strained my eyes. One figure turned sharply, glided toward me, and vanished. The city's muted lights blurred behind it, leaving only empty space where it had been. I swallowed hard. The hum grew louder, though still soft. Constant. Every instinct told me to move, yet my feet felt stuck to the cold metal underfoot. Another figure stretched, head cocking unnaturally. It wasn't moving quickly, but the way it lingered. It felt deliberate, studying, measuring. I could almost smell something with it. Dry, metallic, like iron in water. I stepped back, dragging my fingers along the railing. The fog swallowed the streets below, leaving the world feeling small and unreal. A shadow shifted behind a vent, slid sideways, as if gravity didn't touch it. The humming pulsed with it, echoing inside my chest. I closed my eyes for a moment, tried to breathe through the panic. The wind cut across my face, carrying the faintest rustle, a whisper of movement that wasn't mine. When I opened my eyes, one figure was closer, still faceless, still impossible. It tilted its head again, watching the city, not me. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the one under scrutiny. I could feel my heart beating too loud, too fast. A soft metallic taste lingered in my mouth, like copper. Another figure appeared at the edge of the rooftop, elongated, motionless, quiet. I stepped back toward the stairs. The fog wrapped around me, heavy and wet. The humming stayed, constant, all around, inside me. The city below felt distant, unreal. Sirens, lights, life. It was as if I was suspended above it, alone. I dared to glance back. The watchers hadn't moved, or had they moved closer? I couldn't tell. I didn't dare linger. My hand shook on the railing as I descended. The fog swallowed the rooftop behind me, but the hum didn't fade. It followed, a pulse in the air, a pulse in my chest. I kept walking, and I could still feel them. Watching even when the city returned to its normal hum. Even when the fog thinned, they were up, there, waiting, silent, patient. The park was quiet. Autumn leaves stuck to damp grass, curling under the weight of mist. A single street lamp glowed ahead, pale and weak, cutting a thin circle through the fog. I walked toward it. Each step sank softly into wet earth. The fog thickened, wrapping around trees and benches. Paths disappeared. Curbs and puddles vanished into gray. I raised my flashlight. It flickered. Shadows danced just beyond its weak beam, darting between trunks. I stopped. Nothing moved, but the air was charged. Heavy. Watching. Something brushed past my ear, cold, soft. Not wind, not leaves. I shivered. The lamp ahead seemed farther now. Shapes flickered in the fog. Tall, thin, impossibly quick. They moved silently between the trees, avoiding light. Avoiding me. I could smell damp earth, wet leaves, and something metallic under it all. My flashlight trembled in my hands. The fog clung to my jacket. Wet and cold. I took a cautious step. Another. The shapes vanished, only to reappear a few yards away. Watching. Waiting. A rustling came from the underbrush. I froze. Breath puffed white into the fog. I strained to see, but there was nothing. Then a whisper, barely audible. soft, brushing past my ear like a cold exhale. I spun. Empty trees, empty paths, yet the feeling of presence pressed into me, silent, unrelenting. I forced myself to move forward. Benches emerged from the mist, wet and cold beneath my hands. Footsteps? I wasn't sure. Every crunch of leaves sounded like someone following, yet nothing appeared. The fog thickened. Shapes blurred into one another, indistinct, yet undeniably moving. I could feel them before I saw them. Near, close, a pause. Then, a flicker of light on wet bark, a shadow shifted between the trees. I froze. It didn't advance, didn't retreat, just lingered. The lamp glowed dimly ahead. A pale eye in the gray. I could smell the damp metal of the fence nearby, cold against my fingertips. I lowered my flashlight. Letting the fog swallow its beam, the shapes melted into gray, but the whisper remained. Soft, cold, circling. I stepped backward, leaves squelching underfoot. The fog pressed around me, thicker now, heavier. I felt the ground fade beneath the path. Every step became uncertain. The street lamp's glow trembled in the distance. The shapes were gone. The whisper faded. But not completely. I was alone, and yet I wasn't. The elevator smelled faintly of metal and old carpet. Dim lights hummed above me, flickering once, twice. I stepped in, the doors sliding shut with a soft sigh that seemed too loud in the quiet. The hum of the machinery filled the small space. But then it paused. For a moment, or maybe longer, it felt like time itself held its breath. Shadows pooled in the corners, dark and thick, stretching across the mirrored walls. I could see myself reflected, pale and stiff. Then, movement, figures that weren't mine. Flickers at the edge of the glass, stretching, bending. I blinked. They lingered, silent, watching. The air smelled faintly of oil, of electricity. My own pulse sounded loud in my ears. The elevator lurched. I stumbled slightly, catching the railing with cold fingers, and there, just in the reflection, one shadow shifted closer. Not me. Not human. I held my breath. The hum returned, low and constant, but different somehow. Heavier, denser. I pressed my palm to the mirrored wall. Cool, solid, normal. Yet the figures remained, lurking just beyond the corner of my eyes. Every small movement, the tilt of my head, the shift of my weight, felt magnified, exposing me. I felt their gaze, weighty, cold, unblinking. The lights flickered again, shadows jerked like they were stretching, testing boundaries. A soft metallic scent rose, sharp and bitter in my nose. The elevator paused again, long seconds where nothing moved but the reflection of my own hands. Then the door slid open. A hallway appeared. Empty. Quiet. 2. Quiet. The carpet absorbed every step I made. I glanced. Back. Nothing remained inside the elevator. Yet the feeling of eyes lingered, heavy in the small space behind me. Even as I walked down the hall, the hum of the elevator echoed faintly. Or maybe it was inside my own chest. I didn't look back again, but I could still feel the shadows there, waiting. The city stretched below me, silvered by fog. Streetlights glowed faintly, blurred at the edges, like distant stars caught in mist. I leaned against the window frame, fingertips cool on the glass. The hum of the city was distant, soft, almost underwater, and then I noticed it. A shadow on the rooftop across the street, motionless, yet impossibly aware, blinked. It was gone, replaced by a strange ripple in the fog, like a heat, shimmer that shouldn't exist this late at night. Pressed my forehead against the glass. The air smelled faintly of rain on asphalt. The wind stirred, brushing past my ears. Silence stretched between my heartbeat and the city hum, thick enough to touch. I could feel the weight of empty space pressing in. The fog twisted around the buildings, curling between antennas and chimneys. I could almost hear it moving, brushing past metal and stone. Another ripple appeared, subtle this time, like water bending under light. I inhaled sharply. Cool air filled my lungs, carrying the faint scent of smoke and wet concrete. The streetlights shimmered in response, flickering in static patterns. The shadow, or what had been a shadow, was gone again. Yet something lingered in the silver haze, a presence, quiet, patient. My own reflection stared back, pale and unsteady. I could feel the hum of the city beneath the fog, faint and rhythmic, every pulse of light. Every distant siren felt distorted, slowed. I shivered, not from cold, but from awareness, from the sense that I wasn't entirely alone. I traced the edges of the ripple with my eyes, searching for the impossible, for movement. For form, nothing solid appeared, just the fog, shimmering like liquid silver. The window pane was cold under my fingertips. Breath fogged the glass. I stepped back. The ripple faded, leaving only fog and the faint hum of the city. The shadow hadn't returned, and yet the space where it had lingered felt heavier, quieter waiting. I could smell damp bricks, wet leaves on the rooftop below. The night pressed close, thick and still. I lowered my hand. The city lights blurred. The fog rolled on, and I realized I wasn't sure if I was watching it or if it was watching me. The stairwell smelled, faintly of damp concrete and old paint. Dim light pooled at uneven intervals, leaving corners steeped in shadow. I stepped down slowly, each footfall pressed into silence. Though the walls seemed to swallow the sound, a low hum began to vibrate through the steps beneath me, soft, constant. I stopped. The hum carried warmth, but also weight. Pressing against my chest, shadows twisted along the edges of my vision. They vanished the instant I turned to look. Cold air brushed my neck. Something heavy slid past my shoulder. Not wind. Not a person. A chill sank into my bones. I kept descending. The stairs turned, bended, angled in ways that made no sense. I counted each step, but the numbers felt meaningless. The hum grew louder, resonating through the walls, through my ribs, into my skull. Concrete felt slick under my fingertips. The narrow walls pressed close. The shadows swirled at the corner of my eyes. I dared not glance directly. A soft rustle echoed above me. Like fabric brushing metal, I held my breath. The hum pulsed with it, synchronized with the quiet of my heartbeat. The stairwell seemed endless. Corners repeated, steps doubled back. Railings stretched farther than they should. I could smell the dampness more sharply now. Metal, stone, something faintly acrid. A shadow paused just beyond a landing, still, waiting. I stepped forward. It dissolved, but the chill remained, crawling along my spine. I pressed my hand to the wall. Rough, solid, normal. Yet the hum continued. The air thickened, heavy and close. Each step felt slower, longer. The shadows danced in silence. Just out of reach, I kept descending, listening, feeling. The stairwell bent again, unfamiliar angles swallowing the light. A soft vibration ran through the floor. Or was it through me? I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The hum lingered in the air, low and constant, like a heartbeat not my own. I reached a landing. The walls stretched into darkness above and below. Shivered. The stairwell seemed alive, waiting. The fog lay thick against the buildings. Street lamps barely cut through it. Pale circles of light blurred at the edges. I noticed the fire escape across the alley. And there, a figure crouched, skin nearly luminescent, glowing softly in the mist. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, yet deliberate. I swallowed, cold air filling my lungs. The metal rail beneath my fingers vibrated faintly. I called out. No answer, only silence. The fog swirled between us, curling around the fire escape like smoke. The figure shifted again, twitching with impossible precision. Its eyes, if it had any, seemed absent, yet I felt observed. A soft rustle carried through the alley. Leaves, or something heavier brushing the metal. I stepped closer, heart thudding. The figure moved in impossible angles, limbs bending the wrong way. I blinked. It vanished. The fire escape was empty. Only cold metal and wet bricks remained. A lingering chill brushed my hands where it had crouched. I breathed slowly, listening. The alley smelled of damp asphalt, rain-soaked concrete. Every sound, the distant hum of traffic, a faint drip from a gutter, was magnified in the fog. I traced the edge of the fire escape with my eyes. No sign of movement. Yet the air still felt weighted, heavy with presence. I pressed my fingertips to the railing. Cold, solid, real, and still. The sensation remained, something watching, lingering. The fog curled higher, swallowing the alley. The street lamps flickered once, twice. Shadows shifted along the building walls, twisting unnaturally. I stepped back, shivering. The figure was gone. Yet the memory of it clung to the metal. The fog, the night itself. I could feel its absence pressing in. Quiet, but undeniable. I exhaled. The alley seemed smaller, yet vast in its emptiness. The hum of the city returned, distant, muffled. I didn't look back again. The fog carried its silence, and I carried the weight of what I had seen. The station smelled of damp stone and rusted metal. Dim lights flickered above, throwing pale rectangles onto cracked tiles. I stepped carefully onto the platform. Every footfall echoed sharply, bouncing off walls that seemed too close. Shadows flickered along the edges, stretching like long, thin fingers. I paused. The hum of distant machinery was faint, almost swallowed by silence. Then a whisper drifted through the tunnels, static-filled, soft, carrying a chill that brushed against my ears. I turned a corner. The darkness seemed to split, and there it was. A figure, crouched in the shadows, mimicking my movements exactly. Each step I took, it matched. Each tilt of my head mirrored perfectly. I blinked. It melted into the darkness, leaving nothing but an emptiness that pressed against my senses. The air was thick, damp, heavy with the scent of wet stone. I could hear water dripping from somewhere above. Footsteps or echoes followed me, though no one was there. The platform stretched endlessly ahead. Shadows pulsed along the walls, bending toward me, then retracting. I could feel the hum beneath my feet, vibrating softly through the tiles. Another whisper floated, static and unintelligible, curling around my chest. I held my breath. The figure didn't return. Yet the space where it had been felt weighted, alive. I ran my fingers along the cold railing, metal slick with moisture, solid, real. But the station seemed to breathe around me, shadows curling, echoes answering, the air thick with presence. I turned another corner. Nothing. Only tiles, dripping water and distant hum. Yet I could feel it. Something moving just beyond sight, just beyond comprehension. I shivered, the chill climbing my spine. The echoes stretched longer, following my steps, twisting them. My reflection appeared faintly in a darkened window. A shadow behind it mimicked every move. Though the glass was empty, I swallowed hard. The static whisper lingered, brushing past my ears like dry leaves. I stepped forward slowly. The platform ended in darkness, folding in impossible angles. The subway station stretched on, endless and alone. Yet I felt I was not alone. Something, someone, was always just beyond the corner of vision, watching, waiting. The alley was narrow, Fog pooled along the bricks, curling around puddles and discarded paper. I noticed the graffiti first. New, strange, shadowy figures climbing from walls, reaching toward the dim light. The paint was dark, glossy, wet-looking in the pale street lamp glow. I lingered, studying the shapes, symbols that made no sense. A shiver ran along my spine. Something cold brushed my hand. Not wind, not leaves. I jerked back. The street was empty, silent. The fog pressed closer, heavy and damp. I could smell wet stone and faint metallic tang, like iron in water. Another brush, sharper this time. Against my arm, I stepped back again. A whisper curled around me, soft, familiar. My name. I froze. The graffiti seemed to twist in the light, figures reaching farther, stretching, bending. A faint rustle echoed from a corner of the alley. I strained to see. Nothing moved. Yet the cold lingered. The shapes pressed into my vision. Unnerving, impossible. The fog thickened. I could feel it wrap around my jacket, cling to my hair, fill my lungs. The whisper repeated, faint, teasing. Closer this time. I took a step back. The figures on the walls didn't change, but I could feel their reach. Invisible fingers tracing the air near me. A sudden metallic scent cut through the dampness. I turned, half expecting someone or something to be there. Nothing. Only fog. Only the cold pressing in. The alley seemed longer than before. Walls bending subtly, shadows twisting at impossible angles. I shivered. My fingers grazed the brick, rough and wet, and still the whisper lingered, just beyond comprehension. I exhaled slowly. The figures remained, stretching, frozen, waiting. I didn't linger any longer. I stepped back toward the street. The fog pressed close behind me, silent, patient. The rooftop was quiet. Night had settled fully, fog curling between antennas and chimneys. Concrete was slick beneath my shoes, cold and rough under my fingertips. And then I saw it. A door I hadn't noticed before, rusted, slightly ajar. It hummed softly, an energy I couldn't name. I stepped closer. The metal frame was cold, wet with dew. I pressed my palm against it. The hum pulsed faintly through my skin. Peering inside, shadows twisted against the walls, shadows that moved as if alive, curling and stretching in impossible ways. The air smelled faintly of ozone and rust. I swallowed. The door creaked wider on its own. My heart thudded, loud enough to echo off the rooftop walls. I stepped back, hand grazing the railing. The fog wrapped around my legs, thick and damp. The shadows inside shifted again, forming shapes I couldn't recognize. They stretched toward the door, yet never crossed its threshold. The hum grew slightly louder, vibrating through the air into my chest. I could hear my own breath, shallow and quick. The metal beneath my feet vibrated faintly. I leaned closer, drawn despite the fear curling in my stomach. Shapes moved against walls, impossible and deliberate, as if watching. A rustling behind me made me spin. Nothing. Only fog, curling over the edge of the rooftop. I swallowed again, fingers cold, heart hammering. The door creaked wider still, though no hand touched it. The shadows pressed against the inside, twisting higher, reaching, bending. I took a careful step back. The hum lingered, soft and insistent. Air smelled damp, metallic, thick with anticipation. I could feel the weight of whatever was inside, waiting, silent, patient. The fog clung to my jacket, cold and wet. I exhaled slowly, listening. The rooftop was empty, yet the door continued to pulse with life. The shadows inside shifted once more, curling inwards, fading slightly, as if testing the boundary between space and presence. I didn't step closer again. The hum remained, soft, vibrating, like a heartbeat not my own. The door waited, and I stepped away. Fog wrapped around me, swallowing the rooftop, leaving only the lingering hum in the night. The hallway stretched narrow, pale light trembling from above. Each bulb flickered, irregular. Shadows jumped along the walls, jagged and restless. I stepped forward. Every footfall echoed too loud, too sharp, against the cold linoleum. The air smelled faintly of damp paint and dust. Something brushed against my arm. Cold, wet, like icy fingers tracing the skin. I froze. The wall beside me quivered slightly, as if breathing. I followed the movement with my eyes. It shifted unpredictably, bending around corners I couldn't see. The shadows twisted, stretching toward me, retreating, then pressing close again. A soft hum resonated through the hall, low and vibrating. The silence between flickers was louder than any sound. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick. The bulbs stuttered. Shadows jerked across the floor, moving against logic. I reached out, brushing the wall. Cold, smooth, solid. But the sensation lingered, like a ghostly hand pressing against my palm. The hallway seemed longer now, bending subtly, stretching in impossible angles. Footsteps echoed behind me. Though I hadn't moved, I spun, nothing, only jagged shadows and the flickering light. The air smelled metallic now, faint, sharp, like tension. I stepped forward again, a brush of cold along my back. I didn't dare turn. The bulbs blinked faster, shadows jerking violently. A soft rustling ran along the baseboards. I held my breath. The hall stretched before me, endless in its flickering light. I felt eyes, countless, unseen, following every motion. The silence between flashes pressed in. I exhaled slowly. The cold receded slightly. Shadows settled into faint shapes along the wall. The bulbs steadied, trembling, dim but constant. I moved forward. The hallway was empty, yet the memory of touch, of presence, lingered. I didn't look back. The city stretched beneath me, silvered in fog. Steel beams glinted faintly, slick with dew. I stepped carefully, each footfall muted against the metal. A low hum vibrated through the beams, soft, constant, resonating under my palms. Shadows shifted across the rooftop, not with the light, not with the fog. They moved independently, stretching and curling in ways that made no sense. The wind carried the scent of rain on asphalt, sharp and clean. I realized I wasn't alone. Something, or someone, shared the space, unseen. The hum pulsed, filling my chest. I tried to locate it. Nothing. Just the fog curling around antennas and cables, twisting toward the sky. Shadows thickened along the railings, edges bent, lengthened, reaching for nothing. I inhaled slowly. The metallic scent mixed with ozone, crisp and electric. I shifted my weight. The hum answered, faintly louder, vibrating through the steel underfoot. A shadow detached itself from the corner of my vision. I blinked. Gone. Yet the feeling of being observed remained. The wind tugged at my jacket, icy and persistent. I could hear the distant hum of traffic below, muffled, distant. Underwater. Another shadow stretched along the rooftop, curved unnaturally, reaching across beams. I stepped closer, drawn by fear and awe. Nothing revealed itself clearly, just shapes, movement, the vibration of the hum under my feet. I ran a hand along a railing, cold, solid, yet the air felt heavy with presence. I exhaled. The hum softened slightly, but remained. Shadows curled inwards, folding over themselves. I could feel them near, just beyond sight. The fog rolled across the rooftop, softening the lights of the city below. I shivered, breath fogging in the chill, alone or almost alone. The hum persisted, low and insistent. I didn't move further, just stood, watching, feeling. The rooftops stretched endlessly, alive in shadows and sound, and I realized the awe mingled with fear. Impossible to separate. The hum continued, and I breathed with it, slowly, quietly, alone but aware. The courtyard stretched wide, pale light pooling over stone and metal. Fog thickened with each step I took, curling around benches, walls, and planters. I could barely see beyond a few feet. Shapes slipped silently behind walls, dissolving before my eyes could focus. A rustle. Soft. Swift. I froze. The air smelled damp and earthy. Cold moisture clinging to my skin. I felt it then. Eyes. Cold. Innumerable. Pressing against my back, I dared not turn. The silence grew heavier, settling into my chest. Breath became loud, every exhale loud in the stillness. The fog swirled higher, hiding the edges of the courtyard. I could sense movement just beyond the mist, soft footsteps or shadows sliding across the ground. I tried to follow, but shapes shifted, impossible to catch. Walls stretched farther than they should, corners bent subtly, swallowing light and sound. A faint hum seemed to vibrate through the stones. Beneath my feet, I pressed my palms to the cold, surface not solid, real, yet the weight of presence lingered. I stepped forward cautiously. Fog brushed my face, damp and chilling. Another shape darted behind a column, vanishing before I could see it. Silence pressed harder. I could feel breathless anticipation, each inhale heavy with unease, shadows layered, moving independently of the fog. I spun slightly, feeling dozens of unseen eyes tracking me. The courtyard seemed endless, folding in on itself. I shivered, the chill creeping through my jacket. Air smelled metallic now, sharp, like tension and rain. A faint rustling drifted along the ground, weaving with the fog. I exhaled slowly. The shapes vanished from sight, leaving only mist and empty stone. Yet I knew I was not alone. The cold lingered on my shoulders, on my neck, unseen. I took another careful step. The fog swallowed sound, swallowed light. I could hear nothing but my own breath and heartbeat. And still the presence pressed, silent but undeniable. I didn't look back again. The courtyard remained, pale, fogged, and impossibly vast, alone, but watched. The fire escape rattled lightly beneath my feet. Fog rolled in from the street below, curling around metal and brick. Shadows clung to the railings, but they didn't match, twisting, dancing, vanishing with the fog. Each step I took echoed unnaturally, louder than it should, bouncing off walls and glass. I reached for the railing, cold metal beneath my fingers, solid. Yet the air felt alive, thick with unseen presence. The fog pressed closer, damp and heavy. Shapes flickered in the corner of my vision. I spun slightly. Gone, only mist curling over the ledge. I exhaled slowly. Another step, another echo. The shadows twisted again, as if mocking my movements. A metallic scent drifted in the air, sharp and biting. I could feel it pressing against my neck, along my shoulders. I wasn't alone. Dread pooled in my stomach, sinking low and cold. The railings groaned faintly under my weight. The shadows bent, curling up from the edges of the steps, stretching toward nothing. I could hear my own heartbeat, drumming loud in the quiet. A soft rustling drifted upward from below, carried by the fog. I froze. The fire escape seemed longer than before, folding subtly in impossible angles. Shadows shifted in ways that defied physics, brushing past the edges of sight. I could feel eyes everywhere, unseen, following, watching. The fog thickened further, swallowing light, swallowing sound. Each breath became heavy, damp with cold. Another step forward. The echoes multiplied, mirroring me, moving independently. I didn't dare look down. The city lights flickered faintly through the mist. Shadows twisted again, curling higher along the wall, then dissipating. I exhaled slowly, hand gripping the railing. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp with the chill. Alone, yet watched. The fire escape held its secrets in silence. I stepped carefully, moving with the fog. The shadows lingered at the edges of vision, patient, waiting, and I kept moving. The rooftop was quiet. Fog rolled in low, curling over vents and railings. Concrete beneath my feet was damp. Cold. I noticed the mirror first, cracked. Leaning against a wall, pale light caught the edges fractured, scattering the city below into shards. I stepped closer. My reflection lingered too long, eyes hollow, watching separate from my own. A chill crawled up my spine. I blinked. The mirror did not. It remained silent. I shifted my weight. Cold metal railing pressed against my fingers. The fog wrapped around my ankles, damp and thick. My reflection raised a hand. I did not. A soft wind rustled across the rooftop, carrying the faint scent of ozone and wet stone. The mirror's surface seemed to pulse subtly, dark lines crawling along the cracks. I stepped back. The reflection stayed, hollow eyes following, unwavering. The hum of the city below was muffled, distant, underwater. I reached toward the mirror. Cold, smooth, unyielding glass beneath my fingers, yet the eyes in the reflection seemed alive, aware. I exhaled slowly. The fog shifted, curling over my shoes, over the wall. The mirror tilted slightly, as if breathing. I shivered. The reflection did not move with me. Every instinct told me to turn, to run, to leave. I didn't just watch. The cracked glass fractured the city, the fog, and myself into endless fragments. I stepped back again. The mirror remained, cold, silent, waiting. The rooftop stretched empty, yet alive with presence. Fog clung to my jacket, to my hair, to the spaces between my thoughts. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. The reflection lingered. Separate, impossible. I could feel it watching, following, patient. I exhaled slowly, damp breath fogging in the cold air. The mirror did not flinch. The city lights gleamed faintly through the fog, fractured in the cracked glass. I didn't move closer again. I didn't look away. And still, the hollow eyes remained, alone, yet watched. I stood above the abandoned rails. Fog curled around the metal beams, thick and damp, clinging to my jacket. Concrete beneath my boots was cold, slick with condensation. Shadows moved along the tracks, fluid, stretching impossibly long. The hum of the city felt distant, muted, like it belonged somewhere else. Only whispers remained, drifting through the mist. I could feel the fog brushing my face, damp, heavy, smelling faintly of iron and rain. The tracks vanished into white, endless folds of fog. Shadows twisted along the beams and rails. Moving without source, I shifted my weight. Metal creaking underfoot. A soft rustle carried across the tracks. I froze. The shadows bent, stretching toward nothing. The hum beneath my feet pulsed faintly, vibrating through steel. I could hear my own breath. Loud, quick, uneven. Fog wrapped around my ankles, clinging, pressing. I leaned closer to the edge of the rail, peering into the whiteness. Nothing. Yet the feeling of being observed lingered, persistent and cold. The shadows flickered along the rails, then merged into the mist. A metallic scent rose, faint but sharp. Every footstep echoed too loudly, bouncing between walls that weren't there. I exhaled slowly. The fog thickened, softening shapes, hiding edges, swallowing light. Shadows moved again, long and fluid, brushing the rails and vanishing. Silence followed, heavy and full, pressing against my chest. I could feel the air vibrate faintly, like static crawling along the metal. I stepped back from the edge. The rails stretched endlessly, fog curling higher, indistinct, alive. Shadows waited, patient, dissolving and returning with each shift of light. The whispers lingered, indecipherable, surrounding me. I breathed slowly, damp air filling my lungs, alone, and yet never truly alone. The fog swallowed the tracks, and I stayed, quiet, watching, feeling the weight of unseen presence pressing softly, relentlessly. The room was dim. A pale light seeped through the curtains, stretching across the floor. The air smelled faintly of damp paint and dust. I noticed the window first. The glass reflected nothing of the room behind me, only shadows. Shadows that whispered. I couldn't make out the words. They brushed against my mind, soft, unintelligible. A chill crept along my spine. I leaned closer. A hand pressed against the glass. Cold, still, solid. I spun around. Nothing. Only the empty room. Pale light catching corners I didn't remember. The whispers continued, faint, teasing the edges of comprehension. I stepped back. Fingers brushed the window again. The cold lingered. Silence pressed. Heavy, punctuated by the soft hum of the city outside. Shadows shifted in the glass, bending unnaturally, curling along the frame. I could feel the presence, patient, watching from just beyond the pane. A soft rustling in the air, like fabric brushing stone. I held my breath. The hand on the glass remained, though nothing should be there. I exhaled slowly. The window fogged slightly from my breath, smearing the pale light. The whispers softened, circling, never fully forming words. I reached out. The glass was colder than before. Unyielding, a metallic scent rose faintly, sharp and bitter. I drew back. The shadows lingered in the reflection, moving independently of my own body. I didn't turn again. The whispers faded into silence, but the presence remained, alone, yet watched. The window held its secret patiently. I stepped away, feeling the weight of unseen eyes pressing against my back. The room remained dim, silent and impossibly still, and I stayed, listening, feeling the whispering linger just beyond reach. The rooftop was silent. Fog rolled low, curling around vents and railings. Concrete beneath my feet was damp, cold, smelling faintly of rain and metal. Figures appeared, briefly, motionless, silent. Their shapes seemed human, but wrong, limbs bending at impossible angles, edges blurred by the fog. A cold wind brushed my face, carrying the faint scent of ozone and wet stone. The figures shifted closer. Or maybe it was the wind moving them. They vanished before I could focus. Leaving the rooftop empty, I stepped forward, boots scraping against concrete. Shadows twisted along the fog, stretching, reaching, fading. A hum rose softly from the city below, distant, muffled. I could feel the chill in the air deep in my bones. Breath hung in front of me, visible in the pale light of a lone street lamp far below. The fog pressed close, curling over my ankles, damp and thick. I blinked. The figures reappeared, bending unnaturally, watching, silent, patient. I held my breath, listening. The wind shifted, and they were gone. Only shadows remained, curling against the rooftop walls, twisting with the fog. I could feel eyes on me, though nothing moved. The cold lingered, settling into my chest. I stepped back toward the edge. Fog swirling around my shoes. Concrete, steel, mist. Everything seemed alive. Bending slightly under my gaze, the figures did not return. Yet I could feel them. Patient, waiting, alone, yet not. The fog swallowed the rooftop, and I stayed. Quiet, listening to the hum, the wind, the lingering weight of their presence. The alley was dark. Fog rolled low, curling around dumpsters and cracked bricks. The night smelled damp, Like wet asphalt and rusted metal, I stepped in. Silence pressed against my ears. A cold breath brushed the back of my neck. I spun around. Empty. Only the fog, thick and clinging. Shadows twisted along the walls. Long and impossible. They moved with a life of their own, bending around corners and pipes. My pulse echoed too loudly in my chest. Every step I took seemed amplified. The silence was nearly unbearable, pressing into my skull. I drew in a slow breath. It fogged in front of me, cold and wet. The alley seemed to stretch further than it should. Shadows lingered, curling, retreating, then forming again just out of focus. The street behind me remained empty, yet I could feel it. Something watching, something patient. A rustling in the fog, a soft pressure against my shoulder. I turned, but nothing was there. Only the cold. Damp night, concrete beneath my feet slick from moisture, vibrated faintly with some distant hum. I stepped forward. Careful, every footfall deliberate. The fog wrapped closer. Swallowing light, sound, space, shadows danced along the brick, moving opposite my own steps. A static whisper, low and unintelligible, drifted from deep within the alley. I froze, listening. The breath on my neck returned, colder this time. Brushing like wet silk, I exhaled slowly, the fog swirling around me. Thick and unyielding, the alley seemed endless, bending in ways that made my head spin. Shadows receded, then returned, patient and still, waiting. I stepped back toward the street, fog curling over my shoes, cold and heavy. The alley remained behind me, empty, yet I knew it wasn't. I walked on, ears straining, chest tight, feeling the weight of something that had never left. The rooftops stretched beneath a pale, uneasy sky. Fog clung to chimneys and vents, curling like smoke over broken tiles. The city breathed in low, distant hums, muffled by the night. Lights flickered across the rooftops, uneven, trembling. Shadows reacted, moving too quickly, bending in ways that shouldn't be possible. I stopped, holding my breath. A figure appeared on a distant roof, just beyond the fog, tall, still, almost featureless, yet its gaze felt sharp, precise, piercing. I froze. The hum of the air seemed to thrum through my bones, vibrating, low and constant. The figure lingered. I blinked. It vanished. Nothing remained but fog curling over the edges of the building, pale and silent. The city below felt distant, as though underwater. I stepped forward, toes brushing damp tiles. Shadows shifted again, darting between vents and skylights. They mimicked the flicker of the lights, but not my movements. A soft wind stirred the fog, carrying a cold metallic tang. The air pressed close, heavy and quiet, humming against my skin. I leaned over the edge, peering down, seeing streets disappear beneath the haze. Rooftops stretched further than they should. A patchwork of darkness and pale light. Shadows twisted across the tiles, reacting to lights that weren't there. A static whisper brushed my ear, too faint to understand, leaving me tense and listening. The distant figure reappeared briefly, across the city just at the edge of perception. It stared, unmoving, limbs angled unnaturally, pale against the fog. I blinked again. Nothing, only the hum, only the fog. The rooftop felt hollow beneath my feet, every step echoing too sharply. I shivered, feeling the presence of unseen watchers, patient and silent. The lights flickered once more. Shadows leapt, bent, disappeared. The figure didn't return, yet the city hummed. Vibrating through the steel beams and fog, I turned, feeling the wind brush my neck, carrying whispers I couldn't trace. The rooftop stretched quiet, cold, empty, and still the hum pulsed softly beneath my skin, leaving me alone with the lingering dread. The stairwell stretched narrow and dim, shadows pooling in corners, concrete walls pressed close. cool against my fingertips as I rested them on the railing. The air felt thick, heavy with silence. A hum began low, almost imperceptible, vibrating through the metal beneath my steps. With every descent, it grew louder, resonating through my chest. Shadows stretched along the walls, long and thin, bending around corners that shouldn't exist. I froze. They vanished when I looked directly, leaving only pale, uneven light from a flickering bulb. The hum persisted, melodic, almost musical, though no instrument could be found. It came from everywhere and nowhere. My breath caught. The stairwell seemed longer than it should. Spiraling downward endlessly, steps echoed sharply. Though I was alone, I rested my hand on the wall. It vibrated faintly, humming along with the stairwell itself. A cold draft whispered past my ear, carrying hints of dust and rust, barely perceptible. The shadows moved again, sliding silently across the concrete, bending angles impossibly, yet never touching me. The hum pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Soft, resonant, alive. I paused mid-step. The air felt denser, pressing against my skin, wrapping around my shoulders. I realized the sound had no source. It was inside the walls, beneath the steps and above the stairwell at once. And it was watching. The stairs curved downward, spiraling into fog that pooled like water. I could see shapes forming in the mist, only to dissolve before I focused. Every footstep was a note in the hum. Every pause a silence stretched too long. The stairwell seemed infinite, bending reality slightly with every step. I leaned over the railing, fog swirling below, dense and cold, carrying whispers I couldn't understand. The shadows returned, flickering along the edges of my vision, disappearing the moment I looked. The hum shifted, rising and falling in harmonics I hadn't known existed, vibrating the very air around me. A faint metallic scent rose from the stairs, mingling with dust and the chill of concrete. I shivered, feeling simultaneously drawn downward and unwilling to continue. The stairwell's walls seemed to pulse with the sound, a living corridor echoing my descent. I realized then I was part of the hum. Every step, every breath reverberated through the stairwell, weaving me into its rhythm. Shadows and fog and sound wrapped together, dissolving the boundary between solid and air. I took a slow step, listening to the music of nowhere and everywhere, feeling the hum against my bones. It stretched, deep and infinite, vibrating through the steel and concrete, a presence both terrifying and mesmerizing. And then, just as suddenly, the hum softened. Shadows retreated into corners. The stairwell grew quiet, almost tender, leaving only my breath and the faint echo of my steps. I stood there, alone, feeling the lingering resonance in my chest, aware I had passed through something alive, something patient. The stairwell remained, silent now, but I could still feel it humming beneath the walls. I descended the last few steps, each one trembling with faint vibration, and stepped into the open hallway beyond. Silence greeted me, full and heavy, yet I knew if I listened closely, the stairwell hummed still, carrying its secret in the walls, waiting for another descent. The city lay under a thick veil of fog. Streetlights shivered in the mist, pale halos barely touching the ground. Concrete smelled damp, tinged with smoke and rust. I walked slowly, each step careful, soft against the wet pavement. The fog pressed close, curling around my ankles, muffling the distant hum of traffic. And then I saw it, a shape, pale and hovering, drifting just above the ground. It moved like me. I paused. It paused. A shiver ran down my spine. Its presence was quiet, yet heavy, as though the air itself had weight. The world around me faded. The street, the lamps, the faint smell of exhaust, leaving only it and me. I stepped forward. It stepped forward. I turned. It mirrored every motion, every tilt of my head, every careful step. My pulse thudded in my ears, loud and insistent. I slowed my breathing. The fog whispered around my legs. Soft, damp, cold. The figure followed, floating, silent, impossibly still yet somehow alive. I tried to look away. It remained in the corner of my vision, pale against the gray, stretching, bending like smoke in the wind. I stopped completely, and it vanished. Just like that. The fog rolled over the spot it had occupied, thick and empty. I felt the emptiness like a weight pressing on my chest. The city hummed faintly beyond the fog, distant and unreal. A single lamp flickered, casting a shadow that seemed to twist unnaturally, like it didn't belong to me. I breathed in slowly, the mist cold and damp against my lips. A soft rustling brushed past my arm, but no one was there. The street seemed narrower, the fog thicker. I moved again, steps careful, deliberate. Each echo swallowed by the white haze. Shapes formed briefly in the mist. Walls, parked cars, distant signs, and then dissolved, leaving only the pale emptiness. I turned sharply. Nothing. The figure was gone. Yet the feeling of being watched lingered, curling at my spine, brushing the nape of my neck. I stopped once more. Silence fell, thick and absolute, broken only by the distant, faint hum of the city beyond the fog. The cold mist wrapped around my ankles, the chill creeping higher. I felt my heartbeat, steady and loud, a signal in the quiet. A shadow flickered across the edge of my vision, and my skin prickled. I forced myself to look straight ahead. Nothing. It was gone. Or it was waiting. The fog seemed alive, moving, breathing. I walked slowly, soft footsteps absorbed by the mist, each step a test, each step a heartbeat in the quiet world of gray. Every movement carried the weight of its absence, its watching. I felt my chest tighten. The city hummed faintly, distant yet omnipresent, a reminder of life beyond the fog and the shape that had mirrored me. I paused one last time. The pale figure did not return. Only the fog remained, curling around the street, whispering in silence. Holding its secret close, I exhaled, the cold mist filling my lungs, and moved on, leaving the spot empty, yet knowing it waited. The lobby smelled faintly of damp concrete. The night was cold. Pressed against the glass doors, the city lights blurred by fog. I stepped into the elevator, and it felt heavier than I remembered. The metal walls gleamed under the pale overhead light. Shadows pooled in the corners, dark and thick, waiting. The hum of the machinery started soft, almost indifferent, but soon it became a pulse, syncing with my heartbeat. I avoided the mirrors. They reflected everything else except me, or maybe they reflected too much. I felt a presence behind me, though I hadn't moved. A shift in the air, subtle, almost playful. The floor numbers glowed faintly, pale against the brushed steel. I breathed slowly. The pulse in my chest grew louder. It vibrated through my ribs, through the soles of my feet. The elevator lurched upward, and I glanced toward the mirrors. My reflection was there, but it lingered a fraction too long. Its eyes seemed heavier, darker, watching. I moved slightly to the left. It moved slightly to the left. I froze. The hum became a steady, low vibration, filling the small space entirely. Every step I had taken that day replayed in my mind, echoing with a strange weight. The air smelled faintly metallic, like the fog had seeped in through the pipes. A soft, static buzz wrapped around my ears, subtle, almost comforting, until it wasn't. The corners of the elevator seemed to stretch, lengthening, bending, though the walls were solid. I swallowed. I felt the reflection shift again, just a fraction, and it wasn't quite me anymore. The hum in my chest pulsed harder. I tried to focus on the floor numbers. They blinked slowly, irregularly. The shadows in the corners flickered, as if the light itself hesitated. I exhaled slowly, the breath cold and damp, sticking to the back of my throat. The elevator creaked, soft and low. The hum and my pulse merged into one. I felt pressure behind my eyes, the weight of silence pressing in. I shifted slightly forward. The reflection mirrored me perfectly for a moment. Then it smiled. A fraction, barely noticeable, and I knew it wasn't mine. I stepped back instinctively. The mirrors held me in place, pale and frozen. The hum softened, ebbing like the tide, leaving only the thrum in my chest. The elevator slowed. I could feel the vibrations beneath my feet lessen. The doors opened with a soft groan. The hallway beyond was empty, lit by a single pale bulb. Shadows still lingered along the walls, pooling and stretching. I stepped out, the floor cold beneath my shoes. The hum stayed, quiet, a whisper now, still threading through my ribs. I glanced back at the elevator. The mirrors reflected the walls, the corners, everything. But the space felt hollow. As I moved down the hallway, the pulse in my chest faded slowly, but I knew it had not left entirely. The shadows followed me, only in glimpses, just at the edge of vision. The air smelled faintly of metal and damp fog. I exhaled again, slow, deliberate. The apartment door was ahead, pale light spilling out softly. I turned the handle. Inside, the room smelled familiar, safe in comparison. The door clicked closed behind me. The elevator was silent now, but the weight, the pulse, the watching lingered. I breathed and listened. The wind was thin, carrying the distant hum of the city below. Fog wrapped the rooftop in silver. I stepped forward, each footfall muted against the cold concrete. Shadows pressed close at the edges of my vision, twisting and stretching just beyond reach. The air smelled faintly of rain and metal. I breathed slowly. The silence was heavy, thick enough to lean into. Shapes lurked in the fog, shifting, never still. I tried to focus on them, but the closer I looked, the more they blurred, dissolving into nothing. The city lights were faint through the mist, pale glimmers like distant stars. The fog smelled of cold stone and wet air. My pulse filled my ears, steady, grounding, yet small against the vast emptiness around me. I realized I was entirely alone, yet not alone. The shadows moved with the rhythm of the wind, curling and uncurling across walls and railings. I reached out, half expecting to touch something tangible, but only air met my fingers. Thick and damp, the silence held a weight, patient watching. I shivered, the cold crawling up my spine, then down my arms. The fog whispered faintly, brushing against my skin. Like distant breath, shapes lingered at the periphery, hesitant. I understood then. This was not my world. I was a visitor, stepping lightly through a place that did not belong to me. A pale light reflected off a puddle near the edge. Broken and still, I stared, my reflection wavering. Fragmented. The shadows moved in sync with the fog, neither threatening nor comforting, simply existing. I felt a strange calm, a quiet acceptance. Alone. Yes, but part of a rhythm I could sense, though never truly enter. The wind shifted, carrying a low hum across the rooftop, threading through the steel beams. It vibrated lightly against my bones. I inhaled, tasting the cold mist on my tongue, sharp and clean. I exhaled, letting the silence fill me. The shapes receded slightly, leaving only hints in the fog. I felt eyes where there were none, and accepted it. A faint rustle of the wind against metal railings echoed softly. The fog thickened, swallowing the distant city lights entirely. I stepped closer to the edge, feeling the cold concrete beneath my palms. The rooftop stretched out endlessly, yet contained. The shadows and fog moved around me, patient, indifferent. I stood still. The hum and the silence merged, settling into a rhythm I could almost understand. I let the cold press against my cheeks, the damp against my fingers, the fog curling around my feet. I did not move. I did not call. I simply existed there, A quiet figure among the pale shapes. Alone, but aware. The wind whispered past. The hum settled. The shadows held their places. I was a visitor, and I accepted it. The rooftop waited. I waited. And slowly, the fog pressed close, heavy, silent, unending. The city lay beneath me, swallowed by fog. I leaned over the edge, feeling the cold bite into my fingers. The concrete beneath my palms was damp, slick with condensation. Shadows gathered far below, silent and still. They moved with the fog, curling around streetlights and railings, gathering without sound. The hum from above and below pressed closer, vibrating through the steel beams of the rooftop. I breathed it in, the chill curling through my lungs, through my chest. The fog smelled faintly of wet stone and smoke, and I tasted it in the back of my throat. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The shadows shifted slowly, almost lazily, yet every movement felt deliberate. A sense of inevitability settled over me. The hum deepened, resonating through my bones, echoing the pulse of the city beneath. I felt small and strangely expected. The fog swirled, thickening, pressing against my coat, my skin, my hair. A pale light glimmered through, brushing the edges of distant buildings. I could feel eyes where there were none, watching, waiting. The cold pressed in tighter, not harsh, but persistent. I exhaled slowly, tasting the damp mist, feeling it curl around my shoulders. Some shapes lingered at the edge of my vision, twisting just out of clarity. I realized I would never understand them. Some things were never meant to be known. The shadows below mirrored the fog's movement, stretching, coiling, then vanishing. I shifted slightly, the steel railing cold beneath my hands, grounding me in the present. The hum pulsed like a heartbeat, steady, unyielding. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the silence press in between each beat, alone, yet observed. The wind whispered faintly, brushing across my cheeks, carrying the smell of damp asphalt and distant rain. I felt inevitability again, heavier now, settling like dust in my chest. Every shadow, every flicker in the fog seemed intentional, a pattern I could not read. I exhaled, letting the rhythm of the rooftop, the hum, the cold, and the fog move through me. The city below was distant, unreal, softened by the fog. The shadows shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, as though acknowledging my presence. I understood, without thought, that I was a visitor, and the world beneath, the fog, the hum, the unseen watchers, they were permanent. I stepped back slightly from the edge, still leaning, still aware. The cold pressed against my fingers, the wind brushing my hair, the fog curling at my ankles. Everything was still, yet alive. I did not need to see. I did not need to understand. The hum vibrated through the rooftop, resonating with my heartbeat, merging with the silence. I exhaled again, letting the fog fold around me. The shadows gathered closer, then receded, never leaving, never reaching. Somewhere deep, a quiet dread mixed with calm. I realized this was as it should be. The edge held me, the fog held me, the watchers held me, and I existed quietly, lightly, fleetingly, in a world I could never fully enter. I stepped back further, the steel railing cold against my palms, grounding me. The fog pressed on, endless, patient, and I stood there, watching, breathing, understanding nothing, yet understanding everything. The city below hummed faintly. The shadows remained. The fog pressed close, and I accepted it.